Welcome to Moments in Time with Lucien Byfield. Today we shall look back on the history of the German Grand Prix. The German Grand Prix has predominantly been held at either Hockenheim or Nürburgring. Though there have been multiple versions of these tracks, in the modern era, the German Grand Prix has mostly been held at the newer and shortened version of the Hockenheim Ring, but on occasion also held on a shorter version of the Nürburgring on alternate years. There have been some missing years due to financial issues too, but at times the European Grand Prix has been held in Germany. Look back to 2007 and that amazing race between Nando and Massa. So, let us begin with some interesting bite-sized moments in time. The old Nürburgring is infamous for the accident which nearly cost the life of Niki Lauda in 1976. Also known as the Green Hell, that track saw one of Jackie Stewart's greatest ever drives in 1968, when in foggy, rainy conditions, driving with a broken wrist, Jackie won by over 4 minutes. In 1999, Mika Salo, subbing for Michael Schumacher, had his one and only chance to win a Grand Prix, but relinquished the lead to Irvine. He claims not to regret this. In 2001, Ralf Schumacher won for Williams BMW, though the race is remembered for the start line crash that saw Luciano Berti launched into the air, miraculously coming away unscathed. Nelson Piquet and Eliseo Salazar were to create some iconic footage after Salazar got in the way of race leader Piquet, taking both drivers out of the race. Piquet got out and launched into a display of crazy karate on Salazar, and even when he was done, he kept taunting him. Speaking of Piquet, son Nelson Jr. was to score his one and only podium, coming second to Lewis in 2008. What a tragedy that he is remembered for Crashgate instead of his great talent. And let us not forget, Felipe, Fernando is faster than you from 2010. Of the current drivers, only Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton have won in Germany, though Vettel is remembered for crashing out of the lead last year. For most wins in the modern era, Lewis is tied with Michael Schumacher on 4. In 2000, we saw a drunk walking onto the old long Hockenheim straight wearing some kind of sheet or cape with messages written all over it, making a statement to the Mercedes group. At the time, Mika Häkkinen and David Coulthard were looking like scoring a 1-2 for McLaren Mercedes, but this interruption was to give the angry man his desired outcome. Rubens Barrichello was to come from way down the grid in his Ferrari to take a gamble on slicks in the rain and, in the dying stages of the race, sobbed his way to victory. There would be even more tears on the podium as he recalled his father selling the family car to fund his junior career. It was his first win and the first victory for a Brazilian driver since Ayrton Senna in Australia 1993. As for the wayward wanderer, well, he sobered off in jail. Speaking of people power and crowd strength, in 1994, after the controversial British Grand Prix, in which Michael Schumacher had been up to no good and was subsequently disqualified, he was also set to miss the German Grand Prix due to further penalties. Well, in Germany there were riots, yes, and until I had read one of Steve Matchett's books, I had never heard about this. During the days between the British and German Grand Prix, organisers received threats to the circuit and the actual event if Mr. Schumacher did not race. To prove their sincerity, fires were set off on the track and rubbish was dumped as a warning. Interestingly, Shuey was allowed to race. Think Mexico 1970 or Brands Hatch 1976. If the people want it, they will get it no matter what it takes. Mark Webber was to score his first win in Formula 1 in 2009 at the Nürburgring circuit. Rattling Vettel's cage by taking his first career pole too, he was to bump and grind with Barrichello on the pit straight and get a pit lane penalty. Such was Webber's pace and state of mind that day that it made no difference. He was on another planet and nobody in the world was going to beat him. To hear his emotional outburst as he crossed the line brought tears to my eyes, and I stood up shouting and cheering too. He had waited a very long time for that first win. Patrick Tambay, who had been hired by Ferrari after Gilles Villeneuve's death, was to take an emotional first career win in the 1982 race, famously carrying the number 27 of Gilles on his car. But it was an emotional race for more than one reason. In the championship, teammate Didier Pironi was looking set to win the title, but suffered horrific career-ending injuries in a practice crash due to wet weather and visibility issues. This accident was to have a profound effect upon a young Alain Prost, whom Didier had crashed into, and this influenced the professor to drive within limits from that moment on, particularly in the wet. As for Tombe, he was having a second crack at Formula 1 and was finally a winner, briefly on top of the world in a short 1.5-year stint at Ferrari that would net him 2 career wins. In 1996, Gerhard Berger was looking to score his first win in his second stint for the Benetton team. With only 3 laps to go, his engine blew, giving the win to Damon Hill. As for Hill, he had experienced a very similar thing in 1993, when leading and getting a puncture right at the end of the race, giving Alain Prost his 51st and last career win. As for Berger, he would get his 10th and final career win in 1997. Fresh from a sinus operation, a couple of missed races, and the death of his father, he was to drive like he had never done before, silencing Flavio Briatore, who didn't want him back. Oh, you hear such stories about Flavio. Interestingly, Berger had his first and last win for the Benetton team, Mexico 86, Germany 97. In closing, let me take you back to 1989, Senna versus Prost. Given the intensity of their rivalry at the time, due in part to races like Portugal 88 and Imola 89, the two titans of Formula 1 in the dominant McLaren Honda team were to have one of their rare head-to-head races. I say that because despite what you hear about the good old days, quite often, even back then, races could be processional. More often than not, whoever won out of Senna or Prost on the day did so due to having either an edge in the conditions or less car issues in a particular race. That is racing, but on a few occasions, they were to really fight with no obvious sign as to who would come out the winner. Think Suzuka 89. Anyway, Senna had led early, yet it was really close. Prost would pit and have a terribly long stop, basically costing him any chance of a win. Amazingly, Senna too was to have a pit stop from hell, and in this case, watching the footage, I do think Ron Dennis orchestrated this a little. I might be wrong. Anyhow, in the closing stages of the race, with Senna having come from his horror stop just behind Prost, the two drivers were heading into the last few laps with Senna ever so slightly having the edge. It was tense, edge-of-the-seat stuff. We will never know who would have won had Prost not lost top gear, as, sadly on the back straight, he suddenly slowed, giving the win to Senna. Prost did make it home, finishing second, and he was happy with the result. Having benefited from luck when Senna went out of the British Grand Prix the round before, Prost was to be satisfied in showing the world he could race Senna and at least got 6 points on the day. It was an anticlimax to a truly remarkable race. Nevertheless, we needed this head-to-head at a truly passionate and intense period of Formula 1 history. Well, that's it for Moments in Time. Catch you later.